Chris McKenna, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Really looking forward to talking to you and those that are listening today. So here we go, right?
Yeah, well, so am I because Protect Young Eyes is one of the best resources I know of. I'd love to hear your explanation of it. Before we do that, can you just give us a brief introduction to yourself and then launch into what Protect Young Eyes is and does?
Sure, Johann. I'm Chris McKenna, founder of Protect Young Eyes. I did not expect to be doing this. I'm not a tech guy by background. I'm a businessman who was called into ministry, who then watched us put the internet in the pockets of children. And even though the science hadn't quite been around long enough related to technology and social media and all of that information really wasn't there yet in my heart. That just felt like a bad idea. It felt like a bad idea to put algorithms and what was just this incredibly intelligent technology in the pockets of children. Knowing the little bit that I did from ministry and from working with junior high kids about this unique developmental time that they are in, it didn't feel like the right time to be experimenting on them with something that was unproven. And so I really just started informing my parents at the church where I was working. I did a small Facebook group that led to launching a website. And now, 7 years later, plus, here we are with a team of presenters that speak around the country at schools, all kinds, also in churches and nonprofits, trying to help parents understand that gap that exists between them and their families, and frankly, technologies that were never designed for their children in the first place, and helping them navigate and creating digital spaces that are safer for their children. We can't prevent all harm. I see the world through the lens of risk, and I know that we don't want to remove all risk from the lives of our children lest they become unresilient adults who can't handle difficulty. But at the same time, may we not drop them into places where the risk of egregious harm is there. And I think oftentimes that's what we unwittingly do, not appreciating some of the access and the content and the features that are there for our amazing young people to interact with. So I want to inform, and I want parents to then make informed decisions because they know their kids best.
Yeah, well said. So, how do you do that through Protect Young Eyes?
We do live talks. We also have an online curriculum that parents can go through for those who can't attend. And those talks are done for students K through 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12, where we inform them of practical decisions that they can be making to be more mindful. We challenge the older kids to not go home and smash their phone and get rid of it. No one would listen to that message. But instead, we invite them to create space. So wherever you are right now, take half of that away from the screen, dedicate it to other activities, and see what that half can do. What will you notice in that half, that new half?
All right, so that's a little bit about how Protect Young Eyes helps the young people. And do you find that the young people are receptive to it and make changes in their lives because of what y'all do?
Yeah, we want to be a supportive voice, not a condemning voice. I think they have a lot of adult voices that are critical and condemning about their technology use, often out of a lack of understanding. And that's why what we often want to do is we want to talk to both the parents and the students. So a very typical engagement with us is to come in the day before and that evening speak to the parents and caregivers in a community, and then speak to students the next day. Because what parents and caregivers really need to understand is we ask our children to exert a level of neurological, relational, and emotional self control every single day with a digital device that we never had as a child. Like when you truly understand how these technologies are created, what their business model encourages them to do, which is to create incredibly intelligent digital ecosystems that, whether you're 14 or 40, are incredibly difficult to put down. And then what you layer on the top of that is this unique developmental time where, unlike adults, where that limbic system during adolescence is so on fire and so reaching out, looking for relational connection and affirmation and where do I fit in and what is my purpose and all these big sort of existential questions about my position in the universe, like that's when that happens. And for parents, that's when it happened for them too. It's just what they didn't have when they were growing up were 10,000 people in their pocket fighting to give an answer to that question. And that's what our young people have in their pocket today. So of course they're confused. Of course they're anxious. It's too much too soon in a developmental time when there should be fewer voices who care about them the most, answering life's biggest questions. And that's exactly the opposite of what we've done in the digital age. And that's what parents completely underestimate with the technology today, that they have completely underestimated the amount of chaos and confusion that by their choice they have introduced into the lives of their children, when they should actually be decreasing the amount of choice and confusion in the lives of their children.
Well, are you saying that or doesn't necessarily have their child's well-being in mind?
I believe that they don't know what they're doing too often. There's a marketing machine that's out there that has convinced schools and families that technology is necessary. And I would argue that it isn't. Almost all the very best things are analog when it comes to childhood. And so I think we have the thesis that Jonathan Haidt proposes in The Anxious Generation, which is a book that is very popular right now, is quite simple. We've overprotected children in the physical world and underprotected them in the digital world, right? Whether you are a creationist or an evolutionist, you have to agree that as a species, we have existed in the physical world a whole lot longer than we have in the digital world. Our brain processes, whether it's tactile in reading, holding a book, reading a book on paper, learning on paper, interacting in nature, walking through a grassy field, appreciating the beauty of a sunrise or a sunset. We have been in existence in the physical world and respond neurologically differently and in a more healthy way to that physical world than the digital world, because the digital world is a sugar, I would call it a junk food version of things that we are better at in the physical way. I think COVID taught us that, right? That the two-dimensional version of relationships still left us lonely. That we are created or have changed over time to need physical interaction, looking at other human beings, with a brain that is actually designed to process facial expressions and find meaning in interacting with other human beings in a physical way, that a Zoom call or a FaceTime call can never fully substitute. And those are the little things that I think we have underappreciated about the impact that digital media is having on our children's ability to then become fully launched, fully functioning, fully resilient adults in a world that is sometimes difficult. And they just don't often have all those tools because they just haven't been offered the opportunity to practice them.
So one thing is junk food, another thing is poison, although some people would say poison. What do you think is the biggest realistic danger that young people face with, let's say, smartphones?
It's the idea of too much too soon, right? I mean, it'd be easy for me to point to pornography as toxic to a young brain because of what it activates neurologically, right? A supernormal stimulus that activates way too much, way too soon. As a specific type of content, it is extremely traumatizing and impactful to a developing brain, right? But I just think overall, right, whether it's violent, whether it's suggestive themes, whether it's pornography, it's just extreme versions of war or depictions of real life. It is too much too soon for brains that don't have a neurological or call it a framework, a drawer that has been created to put that information inside of. So therefore it just naturally causes disruption. It causes confusion. It causes chaos when they don't know where to put something. Right? So I tend to think of the brain, and it's not true even when you look at the differences in genders, but when I used to talk just at a 50,000 foot level to parents about the differences, say, between guys and girls when it comes to the brain, right? Guys' brains are a lot like a file cabinet with drawers that you can open and close, and we can kind of put things away. Whereas a female brain, at least in the adolescence that I was working with, is a little bit more like a Eggo waffle, that the syrup is a thought and it sort of infiltrates a lot of the different parts and impacts them emotionally in a much deeper way because they feel deeper, right? They mature emotionally faster than the adolescent boys that I was working with. And so that was just a real simple way to talk about some of the differences. But when it comes to all forms of, call it extreme, mature, sort of violent content, it disrupts all of those different sort of unique attributes where I think in a young female brain, if we're going to talk about some of these differences, which is often feeling things at a deeper level, inside of social media, where everything is about how you feel and look and compare and measure up and filter, that is, of course, causing more deep feeling impacts because of what it was designed to do, right? Those more internalizing disorders of things that you'll see in graphs, right? Not just in America, right? You can look at Canada, you can look at the UK and New Zealand and Australia, some of the 5 countries that are often compared to each other. When it comes to young boys, I think, unfortunately, many of the impacts that I believe that young men are dealing with online don't show up nicely on a mental health graph. So just as forever, in terms of death by suicide, recently we've seen an increase in the number of deaths by suicide in young girls. But in terms of which between boys and girls are often the ones completing that act, it's always been boys. So on a chart, the impact of digital media hasn't really shown much of a difference when it comes to anxiety, suicide ideation, self-harm incidents that are reported. You don't see as big of a change in boys over the past 10 to 15 years. But that's because I believe that many of the impacts that social media, gaming, pornography are having on our young men are longer tail issues that are showing up in other places. Fewer of them successfully graduating from higher learning, from college. Fewer of them entering the workforce. Now, there are other reasons for some of those things, whether it's just greater opportunities across the genders and equality, and those are all things that are excellent and wonderful. But I think some of the things that technology does to weaponize different attributes of boys, their desire to conquer, their desire to pursue, their desire to be rewarded for overcoming, and these all sort of things that have been a part of being a man for so many years. Gaming really is something that's going to be attractive to that brain. Pornography is going to be something really attractive to that brain because it's a junk food, easy, neurologically almost more novel version, and the brain loves novelty, right, of the real life thing. And so neurologically, it's going to prefer that and pursue that in place of the real thing. And those are some of the things that I'm very concerned about when it comes to our young men in terms of those more young adult failure to launch kind of issues that I think are going to show up more and more over time. I think we're starting to see that already, that just take a little bit longer to show up in their life. So,
yeah, and pornography addiction is huge for young men, and it's devastating with its extensive, sometimes lifelong consequences. That's one of the saddest things. So what do you do for the adults then?
Yeah, so I may be referring to when we're speaking to them, say at a school or somewhere, say, is that what you're referring to?
Well, the reason I heard about y'all is through your website, and I was really impressed. It may be the best resource for this I've discovered. In fact, off the top of my head, I think it is. So in particular, what I like is you log in, and then it can give you can easily identify for each device that you have how to set up the controls that you want or how to understand it. It's very easy to use website. In my experience, what parents are looking for is just something that's very simple. It'll walk them through the technology that they're not familiar with themselves.
And that's what we really want to be. We want to be that step-by-step, chat-by-chat, real practical solution, because not everybody is a tech expert. And the technologies are changing, the devices are confusing, it's often not intuitive. Again, they weren't designed with protecting kids in mind. iPhone is a perfect example of that. When you experience other things on an iPhone, like, say, Apple Wallet, or maybe even applying for an Apple credit card that then is used in Apple Wallet, or even the most recent marketing campaign that they had for Apple Vision, their VR sort of augmented reality goggles. Everything in Apple is always this beautifully elegant user experience designed experience that it's the best. That's what they've always been known for, right? Even going back to their desktop computers that were all different colors, and the boxes that we get, and people keep their Apple boxes because even the boxes are beautifully designed, and you have, all the boxes of all the old iPhones and the MacBooks that you've bought over the years, and you don't even know why, but you feel compelled to keep it. That's always been Apple's thing, is a beautiful user experience, except with their parental controls. It's as if they took whoever didn't care, whoever had no user experience, user design background, and said, just throw some code together and call it parental controls. If they would apply the same amount of care to the way in which their parental controls are structured, then we'd have millions more kids protected. In a half day, a developer at Apple, with all their genius, could instantly protect millions and millions of kids in a better way than they are right now. Right? So that's the problem. And that's why that section of our website, just trying to make it as user-friendly as possible. Honestly, Johann, I shouldn't be necessary. Imagine applying what I'm doing to a real life physical example. So imagine there was a crib, an extremely popular crib that was used by 88% of parents with children in America. And everybody loved it. It was beautiful. And when you opened it up, the instructions were constructed in a way that made it highly probable that you would set it up in a way that would harm your child. But because everybody had this crib, you feel pressured and compelled to get it. And you even kind of like it. So you set it up and you put your kid in it anyway, hoping you did a good job. And then you find that there's this website of parents who go, wait, this is how you're supposed to set it up, because my kid fell through the rails, or my kid fell off, or my kid cut their arm on this part, and here's what you do to prevent those things. Right? It's a nonsense example, but that's exactly what I am. And the reason that we don't have that in the physical world is because there are consumer protection laws that hold companies accountable for not building things that harm the consumer. It's liability, right? And in capitalist society like ours, liability has always been the great restraint to irresponsible business. It's always been that way. That's the only thing that works. But that's not true in digital spaces because of 26 words called the Telecommunications Decency Act of 1996 that has been over-applied by courts over the past 28 years and prevents any of us from holding big tech accountable for irresponsible features that have been created for children. Therefore, they're all pretty much blanket immunity and build and do whatever they want in order to create as much engagement as possible, instead of first designing it with children in mind, with engagement as the secondary outcome. So those are the realities that we live in. I tell people all the time, I shouldn't be necessary. I shouldn't have to exist. And through policy and hopefully accountability, at some point, we will live in a society where the devices are designed that do no harm to children in the first place, so that we don't need elaborate device instructions at protectyoungeyes.com.
Yeah, I think people are starting to wake up to it. I saw recently that the New York Health Commissioner declared social media public health crisis and sued some of the major social media platforms. So we'll see how those things go.
Yeah.
Let me ask you some practical questions I get from parents. So one, maybe the most common one is, okay, won't my child be depressed and not have a social life or any friends and be an outcast in society because he or she, usually she, doesn't have social media or a smartphone?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a common one that parents ask. Here's my response to that, Johann, and I'll use the court system as a framework, maybe to illustrate this. So my wife is a fan of sort of mystery court kind of police shows. We'll use Law and Order as an example, right? So there's criminal cases and there's civil cases. Criminal cases, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. And the reason for that is because it's a bad idea to put a bunch of innocent people in prison for things they haven't done. Therefore, for egregious crime, murder, other things, criminal offenses, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what the jury is instructed to believe in order to convict somebody. That's different in a civil case. If your dog does something in my yard, or I'm just taking you to court because of something, you take me to court. Probably more likely I did something wrong, right? And the burden of proof in a civil case is a preponderance of the evidence. In other words, if you're probably guilty, then guilty. Just get out of my court so I can get on to the next case. Let's move on, right? Because there's not as much harm to you as an individual. The evidence is pointing toward there's probably something there. So guilty, let's move on. That's preponderance of the evidence. And we have it all backwards when it comes to technology. My response to that parent would be, weigh the evidence. We are almost to a point where there is beyond a reasonable doubt that for some children, social media will harm them in some way. It will impact their flourishing in a negative way, right? We certainly have a preponderance of the evidence that social media harms children and that they will be impacted in their flourishing as a young person if they use it. There's a high risk of that happening. And so instead, what we wait for is we're waiting for beyond a reasonable doubt evidence that it's harmful, instead of just going on the fact that we have a preponderance of the evidence that it's harmful. And instead, we should be waiting for beyond a reasonable doubt that it's helpful. Why? Because that's what we do with childhood during this unique developmental time. So, amazing parent who is asking that question, ask yourself, what is more probable? Is there a greater risk that your child will be harmed by having it or not having it? Because I can't find one scientific study that tells me that your amazing son or amazing daughter will be harmed by not having it. In fact, you could find on my Instagram and Facebook page a quote from Dr. Mitch Prinstein, who's the Chief Science Officer for the American Psychological Association. I do some collaborative work with him. And I'll read it just so I get it exactly right. But he has a lab and he is doing research and asking teens some of these big questions all of the time. And he shared a quote with me and I got his permission to share it with others. Let's see. He said, there are no findings showing harm to children who stay off of social media. In fact, some emerging evidence suggests that the most socially competent kids are refraining from using these platforms. That's Dr. Mitch Prinstein. So I'm an evidence kind of left brain CPA accountant kind of guy, prove it to me. I'm always looking at that balance of risk. And to me, what's winning the battle is $1 billion marketing machine instead of the reality, Johann, is that I've never had in 9 years of doing these presentations, I've probably done 1,000 presentations. I've never had a parent email me, text me, DM me, or call me and tell me, Chris, I am full of regret. I screwed up. I gave my kids social media. I gave my kids Snapchat too late. I'm a horrible parent. I've never heard those words.
Well, good for Dr. Prinstein. He helped me get into grad school with his psychology graduate school application guide. I didn't know he also did research in this area.
Oh, that's
amazing.
Indirectly.
I don't know the guy, but he has an amazing guide for getting in. So, okay, another one is I just want my kid to be normal and grow up like everyone else. I don't want them to live in a sheltered bubble.
So there's a difference between what we say is delay is the way. Delay is the way is not a no tech strategy. It's a slow tech strategy. It's right kid, right tech at the right time. You can be a techie kid. You can have a kid who pursues a computer science degree. You can have a kid who loves and appreciates AI and knows how to use it, but who hasn't been dropped into algorithms that don't appreciate him, who haven't been dropped into a comparison engine that is always showing him or her a different version of reality than what you want them to see. That isn't putting them 3 clicks away from pornography, right? So I have 4 children, ages 12, 14, 14, and 19. The 3 youngest are boys, a set of twins in there. So I have middle school and early high school. They're all very techie kids. Like my son Cole can, through Python, write code and build these fun little games. But he will not have social media for years. right? And he started off on a Gab phone, which was locked down with no internet, no social media, so that I can observe how he interacts in text messages and things to see how technology and my amazing kid work with each other. Are they compatible, right? It's training wheels and then seeing, is he ready for a locked down iPhone, for example, right? These are very intentional things. So it's not a binary all or nothing. It's very much slow. It's very much intentional. It's training. It's scaffolding around our children. It's shoulder to shoulder with technology to see how they interact with it. It's co-play. It's curiosity. These are all the very practical things that we share with parents in our framework, our Tech Ready Home framework, to help them kind of find that middle ground between what sometimes either feels like, well, just let them have it, or just bubble wrap. And neither of those are the right option.
What's the advantage of a Gab phone over a locked down iPhone?
So there are a number of, in the US at least, there are a number of kid-friendly phone options. So an iPhone was never designed for children. Their parental controls don't actually control what they say it does. So even though you have everything enabled on an iPhone, there's still 100 different ways that a highly motivated teenager can circumvent whatever you have on it. It wasn't designed for them. Now, I know that a lot
Really?
of
Even
parents have,
like if they lock down all apps, like you can't even get a new app. You lock down the internet. I mean, you know more than I do, so I really want to learn here.
right. So in the screen time controls, if you were to turn off Safari and if you were to turn off the App Store, so you cannot download an app, but you still have text messaging or you still have any of the other apps on the phone, there are 10 different ways that I could still get to an unfiltered Google search.
Okay.
It
So
doesn't, it does,
even with just text messaging and then phone, just those two features.
that's right. Yep. You would
Okay. Okay,
still be
that's good
able
to
to
know.
get to sites. There's one way to block that, and that's in the allow list only feature in screen time, where you could put one website on the allow list, like pbs.com or something innocent, so that anytime you try to even open a site on a hidden browser, if it's not pbs.com, it won't go there. But like, these are the kinds of things though that you
Wow.
need a master's degree, or you need my website. Again, it's back to that illustration, right? That
Yeah.
shouldn't be necessary. If you say in your parental controls, turn off the browser, don't you as a parent think to yourself, they can't get to the internet?
Right.
That's an example of Apple not fulfilling their promise because they haven't thought through their parental controls in the way that makes sense, right? If you turn off the App Store, you would think as a parent, well, my kid doesn't have TikTok on their phone. They shouldn't be able to watch TikTok videos, or they shouldn't be able to see an Instagram post. Well, that's not true. It doesn't matter if the App Store is turned off. It's because of these hidden backdoors and in-app browser capabilities, or a link that's sent through text message, that kids can still have access to all of these digital spaces. It's another example of Apple not fulfilling their promise on what their controls imply that they do.
Oh, that's really good to know. I'm really glad that you shared that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, most common question maybe, what is the age to get a smartphone?
Well, if it were as simple as a number, and trust me, I want a number. I'm a CPA. I want a number, but it's not. So just 2 days ago, this is what I posted on social media, and anybody could find this on Instagram or Facebook. The picture shows a couple of kids hiking, and it says "One Precious Childhood." And here's the caption. It says, "What's the right age for a smartphone? What's the right age for social media?" These are common questions, but I'm not sure they're the right ones because they too often elicit a quantified response. Instead, I think we need to ask deeper questions. For example, what digital decisions will give my child the most fulfilling childhood? Not happiest, but most fulfilling. Because we are more responsible for their future wellness than their current happiness. Delay is the way. Age 16 for social media? Maybe. But for some, that's still not quite right. The struggle is very real, I know. I don't have silver bullet answers, but I do want us to remember that age doesn't mean ready. Why? Because big tech does see your child as a number. So you must see her for who she is, a soul who has been gifted one precious childhood. So there's my
Wow, that's fire.
response, right? There's my
Yeah,
response
that's great.
because I'd love for there to be just a number. I want a number. It's easy to parent to a number, like a driver's license, but it's not that simple. So,
Okay. Okay, what about, hey, they're going to get this technology anyways, and I want to be there guiding them to when they
sure.
make those mistakes.
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement. So one of the things that we talk about is this concept of fail small, right? Fail small, letting our kids try, practice, training wheels kind of approach to digital spaces, but make sure that they don't fall too far. So, I still think there's plenty of runway in the life of a child by not getting social media until age 16 for you to observe whether or not he or she is ready. So fail small, letting our kids explore digital spaces, devices, and social media while they're still at home with us. But that means a slow tech approach, right? Letting them try things, just like training wheels on a bicycle. We don't push them down the biggest hill the first day they want to learn how to ride a bike. So even if we give them that device while they're still with us, right, we enable the strongest privacy settings for social media, only approved followers, never more than 150. Parent-led ownership, meaning that no digital device that connects to the internet is owned by a child. They're all owned by adults who loan them to children while they're in the house. There's a mindset there that I think is really important. You're checking in often. You're saying things so often to them that matter related to technology that they're rolling their eyes and finishing your sentences. Nothing at night, nothing in bedrooms because of what we call the toxic trio, which is bedrooms, boredom, and darkness whenever you have technology. So these are things that I encourage, right, in families, but again, slow, delayed, a little bit of runway so you can see how they do while they're still with you.
Okay. So one thing that all those responses have in common, I think, is there's no easy, simple answer that can be numerically quantified.
That's right.
Rather, it's based on a judgment on the part of the parent for their knowledge of their child. So Plato says that the prudence reason is the charioteer of the other virtues, or the charioteer of the soul. It's said in different ways. So that it seems to me that that's like the fundamental human virtue: prudence, good judgment in action, and that's what successful parenting hinges on the human level, at least.
Yeah.
And this area is no different. So to have a successful plan for technology use for one's child, it requires deliberate thought with your spouse, tailored to your knowledge of your child and his or her needs. So it's going to take a lot more
Very well
work
said.
and
It
more
is.
time.
Yeah. No, that's beautifully said and precisely true. Exactly true. I think big tech wants us to believe it's a simple decision. So the number that is thrown around because of a 1998 law is age 13. The Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, COPPA, established age 13 as the digital age of adulthood. That
Well,
was
they had
based.
so much foresight, knowing that smartphones were going to come out and social media, and knowing that 13 is the perfect age for that.
Well, so here's the problem. None of that existed, right, in 1998. Age 13 was designated as at least partially appropriate in a world of chat rooms, Netscape, and AOL. We did not have TikTok. We did not have Snapchat. Nothing that we use today was even conceived. We didn't have generative AI. We didn't have Chat GPT. We didn't have nudifying apps. We didn't have deep fakes. We didn't have any of this. Even if you talk to Senator Markey, who created COPPA in 1998, who is still a senator for the state of Massachusetts, he would tell you that in 1998, that was still a concession, that he wanted age
Wow.
15 but that was the best that they could do against the lobby machine of big tech, right?
Wow.
So in so many words, if in 1998 age 13 was seen as still probably too young, then where are we today? And so that's the problem with reducing it to a number or reducing it to a line, because it eliminates all the unique, beautiful characteristics of our children, their unique abilities and vulnerabilities that can be so easily weaponized by technology that simply was not created with them in mind.
Great. Any last words for our audience?
I would love to help. So if I've said things that have stirred any anxiety, concern, questions, know that you are not alone. There are tens of thousands of parents all over the world who we have helped over the years here and will continue to help. And the technologies where your children are spending time are not getting any safer. Therefore, the need to be intentional, following the words that you shared around prudence, are more necessary every single day, but you don't have to do it alone. Come to us and ask for help, and we'd be happy to give it. And you can do that at our website or through a direct message on any of our social media platforms.
And a really easy entry point for parents is just logging on to Protect Young Eyes and taking the digital safety assessment and seeing how they can make the other devices safe. So, well,
there you go.
Thanks a lot, Chris, and thanks for what you do. Keep it up.
My pleasure.